party leader and thank her and colleagues for the support. I'd also like to thank the mayor, my councillors, and the constituency team for their support, as well as my personal support team. And of course, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Marshall. Mr. Marshall, it looks like the mics are having some issue. See if you can help me with the mic. Members.
The mic is not working.
Technology.
Sure it's not working. Wow.
Mr. Speaker, I'd also like to acknowledge the support of my wife, Anushka, who is in the gallery, and family. And I thank the citizens of Central Manchester for returning me to Parliament for the third time, and with over twice the majority of the previous election, despite a swing against our party nationally. I'm encouraged that my efforts have been sufficiently appreciated that the constituents of Central Manchester continue to give me their vote of confidence. Mr. Speaker, in my first term, I articulated a vision for Central Manchester to become a center of excellence for the knowledge-based industries and set about persuading stakeholders to buy into that vision. It would rest primarily on three sectors: education, health, and ICT. In the second term, that was 2012 to 2016, significant progress was made in advancing that vision. In education, we added 2,000 quality high school places and constructed new classroom blocks at 5 schools, reducing overcrowding and taking Mandeville Primary off the shift system. I wish to acknowledge the support of my colleague from Central Kingston, who was a great partner as the Minister of Education making that happen. Mr. Speaker, we have an excellent set of schools in the constituency, getting good results. And I really hope the current Minister of Education doesn't disrupt a system that is working. In the health sector, the Mandeville Regional Hospital has acquired adjacent land to facilitate its expansion and upgrade to a Type A facility, something supported by my colleague from Eastern St. Thomas when he was Minister and he designated Mandeville Regional a Type A in transition hospital. I want to acknowledge that. Meanwhile, substantial private investment has occurred at Hargreaves Memorial with the construction of a new wing and the acquisition of sophisticated equipment. The first step toward implementing the vision was having the PNP commit in its 2011 manifesto to establishing an ICT center in Mandeville. Then began a process of searching for investors and speaking the vision into being. By 2013, that search had led to Sutherland Global Services and its head of global operations, K.S. Kumar, a true friend of Jamaica. Sutherland Global had already established operations in Kingston, and with a combined effort led by then Prime Minister Simpson Miller, the MP and local stakeholders, as well as the relevant ministers, Kumar and the Sutherland team were persuaded that Central Manchester was an attractive location to expand operations in Jamaica. Sutherland subsequently opened its first facility in Mandeville last year. Today, Sutherland has already almost outgrown that facility and is looking to expand further in Mandeville, where it already employs almost 1,000 persons, and they're looking to lease additional commercial space. The expansion of this large operation will provide a boost not only to the economy of Manchester, but to the entire central Jamaica. Mr. Speaker, I now turn to national security. Violent crime is really an outcome of failures or weaknesses in many different areas of the society. Poor parenting and family structures, inadequate social services, insufficient jobs, ineffective law enforcement, and the way how politics has been practiced. Mr. Speaker, posterity requires, indeed demands, that some attention be paid in this presentation to the recently issued report of the Commissioner of Inquiry appointed to inquire into events which occurred in Western Kingston and related areas in May 2010. I'll refer to it as the report.
Government.
Mr. Speaker, the Tivoli operation and the preceding events will live in infamy. It was a shameful period in our nation's history, and a high price was paid in terms of loss of life, property, and reputation. The Jamaican people have been fed with such a litany of falsehoods about what preceded and what took place during and after the operation to arrest Christopher Dudus Coke that this report is important to help establish the historical record. The opposition has appointed a team to study the report carefully and will be making a full statement on the report in due course. While we await the detailed report or the detailed review, there are some excerpts of the findings from the first 5 or 6 chapters or sections which are instructive. Now I'll quote from some of these. Finding 3.9. It is very probable that Coke was tipped off. Mr. Speaker, within 5 minutes of the Chief of Defense Staff leaving the briefing of the Prime Minister at Vale Royal, Coke left his Belvedere home and headed for Tivoli. Mr. Speaker, this was a completely avoidable outcome. Finding 3.17. We are satisfied that as of 26 August 2009, the Attorney General was seized of all relevant documentation to enable her to exercise her discretion in favor of signing the authority to proceed. That is, to have Coke arrested with a view to his answering the extradition charges in the Magistrates' Court. However, Mr. Speaker, the Attorney General did not sign the authority to proceed until 18th of May 2010, some 9 months after the request was received. Again, had the Attorney General acted on the 26th August, we could have avoided the conflagration. Finding 3.53. We are satisfied that the Prime Minister's announcement that the security forces will be moving swiftly to bring the current situation under control was a clear hint of an imminent internal security operation and had the effect of giving impetus to the preparations of some residents in their desire to create a fortress of Tivoli Gardens. Finding 3.55. We are also satisfied that the announcement took away the element of surprise from the planned operations of the security forces and allowed the supporters of Coke to mobilize their own forces against the security forces. This is the Commission's report. Finding 3.56. In those circumstances, we think that it was incumbent upon him, and they're referring to Mr. Golding, as Prime Minister and Minister responsible for defense, to have communicated with the heads of the security forces prior to his broadcast. Finding 3.57. We believe that such fortification of a residential community in a Commonwealth Caribbean state was unprecedented in the history of the region. Finding 3.57. We believe that such fortification of a residential community in a Commonwealth Caribbean state was unprecedented in the history of the region. 3.58. We accept the evidence that gunmen from Tivoli Gardens and approximately 300 more gunmen from across Jamaica were mobilized with a view to preventing the arrest of coke. Finding 3.59, we are troubled that the vast majority of residents who testified pretended ignorance of the persons who created the barricades, although they admitted seeing some barricades in the area. It seems to us that these witnesses were glued to a code of silence. We are of the opinion that since elements of Coke's vast organization are still active in Tivoli Gardens and other parts of Jamaica, as we were told, these residents may still be living in real fear of reprisals if they divulge information about criminals. Finding 3.76, the rule of law was under the severest threat, and we can put the situation in no better terms than those used by Mr. Golding, namely, and I quote, a calculated assault on the authority of the state. Mr. Speaker, I turn now to the next section, 4. Finding 4.105. So far as the events of 24th May are concerned, officers of both the JDF and the JCF were assailed by constant, sustained, and heavy gunfire soon after setting out from the UDC car park towards Tivoli Gardens. 4.106, finding 4.106. Gunmen were strategically positioned on high-rise buildings within and outside of Tivoli Gardens, and they maintained a steady offensive against the security forces. Finding 4.109, Mr. Speaker. Having seen actual real-time video footage of the gunfire to which Bravo Company was exposed, we were astonished at its intensity and duration. We were astonished. Finding in the next chapter, Mr. Speaker, finding 5.20. The video evidence that we saw left no doubt in our minds that the special arming of criminal elements in Tivoli Gardens was no mere allegation. It was a fact of frightening proportions. Finding 5.21. The armory which Coke established was comprised of M16 and AK-47 rifles, handguns, grenades, at least one .50 caliber Grizzly sniper rifle, and a large quantity of ammunition. These rifles were no ordinary firearms. Finding 5.32. The purposes of this armory were, inter alia, to repel attacks by the security forces to engage in arms and drug trafficking within Jamaica, and to ensure that the presidential clique/shower posse was capable of engaging in and winning gunfights with other gangs. Mr. Speaker, finding 5.75, treating the fortification of Tivoli Gardens as an important incident in arming that community, we find that this fortification was indeed special because the emplacement of improvised explosive devices among barricades capable of detonating and causing injury or death was a new phenomenon in Jamaica. Nothing of its kind had been seen in Jamaica prior to May 2010. And finally, Mr. Speaker.
No, not final.
Final finding that I'm going to quote this afternoon, finding 5.85.
Oh, yeah, up to chapter 5.
Coke may have been obliged to beat a hasty retreat from the area of the presidential clique. Indeed, the sum of US $245,000 cash US $245,000, $30.6 million at today's exchange rate. Also found on the 25th May at the presidential clique, supports an inference of a hasty escape from Tivoli Gardens, and it tells you the kind of money that was sloshing around in that thing. Mr. Speaker, these are all findings of a factual nature, which are important for the historical record. In the years since 2010, there has been a creeping revisionism in the accounts of what took place. These accounts seek to focus entirely on the security forces' excesses and minimize the responsibility of the political leadership that created this mother of all garrisons in the first place, which then incubated and nurtured the murderous shower posse over generations of leadership. Tivoli Gardens, ironically named after the amusement park in Copenhagen, was a social experiment that went wrong. That social experiment mutated into a garrison. These recent accounts ignore the fact that it was a corrupt attempt to delay and frustrate the extradition that led to this civil war conflict in the middle of a residential community. There was almost a full battalion of criminal paramilitaries confronting and engaging the Jamaican state's security forces. Later sections of the report identify adverse findings against members of the security forces, allegations of extrajudicial killings, and other human rights abuses by the security forces. These findings will likely be the subject of internal disciplinary reviews or criminal investigations and prosecutions. Therefore, I will avoid commenting specifically on them. However, Mr. Speaker, the opposition deeply regrets the injury and loss of life to both civilians and members of the security forces, and further condemns any of the allegations of extrajudicial killings or other abuses that are subsequently proven. Finally, the report makes 51 wide-ranging recommendations for the consideration of government and eventually Parliament. We look forward to the acceptance and implementation of many of these recommendations. The opposition PNP at that time, fully aware that many in our security forces had developed in an environment of hard policing, where there have been human rights abuses of our citizens, decided that it was unwise to support a second extension of the state of emergency, as was being proposed by the then JLP administration. We recognize the potential for significant abuse of citizens' human rights and freedoms. In any event, the chaotic conditions that necessitated the initial declaration of the state of emergency no longer existed at the time of the request for a second 30-day extension. Mr. Speaker, we make no apology for taking that course of action, and this report vindicates our decision. So, Mr. Speaker, this was the context that we inherited at the beginning of 2012. Security forces had made headway in reducing murders coming out of the Tivoli operation. As a result of significantly degrading the capabilities of Jamaica's apex criminal organization, the Shower Posse. At the same time, however, serious concerns were being raised about human rights violations by the JCF.
You know the report was right about you. You know the report about you was right though.
Mr. Mackenzie.
Including extrajudicial killings, not just in the Tivoli operation, but also in various operations over time. This culminated in the application of Leahy vetting by the US government of several units of the JCF and the JDF after the release of the Public Defender's report on the 2010 operation. Our new administration, Mr. Speaker, set about a fundamental transformation of the relationship between police and the citizenry. We believe that sustained success against violent crime must stand on a solid foundation of trust between the police and the communities they serve. Therefore, we undertook a number of initiatives to remove sources of friction and build trust. These included instructing the JCF to downplay the paramilitary style of dress by police personnel. Instead, we emphasized the civilian khaki and Red Sea uniforms. The police must be seen as a part of the civilian community, not a force of occupation. We distributed approximately 7,000 less lethal kits, that is, utility belts with batons, handcuffs, and pepper spray, to police personnel, and facilitated training in the appropriate use of force for frontline personnel. Consequent on the amendment to the Dangerous Drugs Act, there are now 14,000 fewer arrests per year for smoking of a ganja spliff. A traditional source of friction between the police and community youths. Our administration had virtually eliminated the use of curfews, a restriction on citizens' right to freedom of movement. Through instituting the above measures, the JCF now enjoys a better relationship with many communities, which facilitates improved information flow to plan operations and contributed to a 61% decrease in police fatal shootings during our term in office. In fact, 2015 recorded the lowest number at 91 of police fatal shootings in over 30 years, Mr. Speaker. Our administration, you're correct. Let me repeat it. In fact, 2015 recorded the lowest number at 91 of police fatal shootings in over 30 years. Our administration did not consider the lives of Jamaicans, even alleged criminals, as mere collateral damage. The second important broad policy thrust was to build institutional capacity and significantly improve the investigative, operational, and forensic capabilities of the ministry, its department, and agencies. In this regard, Mr. Speaker, we merged the former forensic lab and legal medicine unit to form the Institute of Forensic Sciences and Legal Medicine. Ballistic and laboratory capabilities were upgraded. The clear-up rate for murder, as at 2015, is now over 50%, up from 28% only a few years ago, and it is continuing to improve from year to year. In 2015, more than 700 persons were arrested for murder, the most in any 1 year. The JCF recruited more qualified persons and in greater numbers. All recruits became subject to background screening and polygraph testing. MOCA was established to go after the criminal kingpins and their facilitators, including corrupt public officials. Legislation to make MOCA a statutory body, independent of the JCF, was far advanced when we left office, and I expect the minister to give an update on that when he speaks in the sectoral debate. Billions of dollars were invested in upgrading the automated palm and fingerprint identification system, in upgrading the telecommunication system for the JCF, in acquiring new vehicles for the JCF and the JDF, and acquiring a new protected mobility vehicle, Bushmaster squadron for the JDF. Brand new. The FLA and PICA were both recognized as top-performing agencies and became fully self-funding entities during our administration. Between 2012 and 2015, we enacted several pieces of groundbreaking legislation to provide policy support to our security forces in the fight against criminals. These included the Law Reform Fraudulent Transactions Special Provisions Act, the Criminal Justice Suppression of Criminal Organizations 2014 Act, commonly referred to as the Anti-Gang Law, the DNA Evidence Act 2015, the amendment to the Proceeds of Crime Act, which among other measures establishes a cash transaction limit to make it more difficult to launder money. Amendments to the Maritime Drug Trafficking Suppression Act in 2015 to help stem the flow of illegal weapons into the country through the guns for drugs trade. The results of these initiatives are reflected in a long-term downward trend in all serious and violent crimes. Mr. Speaker, the average number of murders per year continued to decline during our period in office, and I acknowledge that it started post-2010. In our 4 years, the average number of murders per year was 1,127, compared with 1,470 per year for the 4-year period before that. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister campaigned, well, when he was then opposition leader, campaigned on what I believe is a fiction, that crime increases just by virtue of the PNP being in office. More recently, however, he stated a desire for a bipartisan approach, which is a change, but one that is welcome. For the first 2 months of this year, murders and shootings were down by 16% and 21% respectively, and all categories of violent crimes were down by approximately 30%. So you got it on a good trajectory, Minister, even though you didn't want it. When the baton was handed to you, the trajectory was on a downward trend. The figures up to June 18th, however, show significant slippage since the JLP came to office, as murder is now up year to date by about 0.5% and shooting by approximately 1.5%. The percentage reduction of all categories of violent crime is now down by only 10% compared with the 30% it was down just 3.5 months ago. So all I'm saying, Mr. Speaker, is that crime affects both sides. Crime is a challenge to both sides. Let us not make it into a political football. Let us work. Mr. Speaker, I want to touch briefly on prison reform. As a country, we have long recognized the need for a modern, purpose-built prison to improve the conditions under which inmates are held. However, budgetary constraints and competing priorities have prevented successive governments from solving the problem of the deteriorating conditions in our major correctional facilities. 70% of the prison population are low to medium risk, serving sentences of between 3 months to 3 years. It is therefore not in the country's best interest to hold these inmates, mostly young men, in subhuman conditions where they become hardened and eventually return to society, posing a greater safety and security risk. The island's 2 principal correctional facilities, the St. Catherine Adult Correctional Center and the Tower Street Adult Correctional Center, were built in the 1600s and 1800s respectively. They are outdated and dilapidated with limited scope for rehabilitation of inmates. These institutions are literally falling apart and are highly susceptible to natural disasters with great potential for injury, loss of life, and liability to the state. And this is for both inmates and the staff. Our administration had taken steps to improve the conditions under which inmates are held. These include separating the juveniles from the adults when we renovated the South Camp Road Detention Center for the female juveniles in 2013. In September 2015, we commenced the construction of a 300 block at the Tamarind Farm facility to accommodate medium-risk inmates, and I believe that should be near completion at this point, Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the member's time be extended by 5 minutes to conclude his presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So, and the plan was to reduce overcrowding at the maximum security facilities by transferring as many inmates as possible to the medium security facilities. Minister, the Minister will be able to update us, I hope, when he speaks next week, is it, Minister? Or when he speaks in the sectoral debate, on progress towards building a new maximum security prison. It is a matter of national security and public dignity that Jamaica pursues a modern and highly functional correctional system to replace our two aging facilities. Mr. Speaker, in the last administration, more attention and resources were invested in attacking the root causes of crime than ever before through carefully designed crime prevention measures. One such measure is the Citizen Security and Justice Program 3, the CSJP 3. Through this project, the Ministry of National Security has been spending over 4 years more than $50 million to contribute to the reduction of crime and violence. The specific objectives are to improve social cohesion and community governance, to increase employability and employment of residents in target communities, and to improve access to and the efficiency of justice services at the community level. There are new elements in this project that weren't in the first two, such as the funding of violence interrupters managed by the Peace Management Initiative, which is showing promising results in St. Catherine North, and funding for social marketing to support the Unite for Change initiative. Mr. Speaker, the Unite for Change initiative was perhaps the most far-reaching innovation from the last 4 years in national security. It was a behavior change measure to educate citizens on the root causes of the epidemic of violence, igniting their passion and energies and commitment to defeat violent crime, and creating pathways to help move people from concern to action. It involved partnerships with community organizations, churches, schools, and various civil society groups who are lending their hands, hearts, minds, and voices to promote positive change in our society. It also sought to promote interministerial cooperation in violence prevention initiatives. The Unite for Change initiative uses new and traditional media, as well as more traditional face-to-face meetings and smart mobile technology, which I heard the new minister speaking to, the Stay Alert app, and I'm glad he's continuing to promote and enhance it. It targets school-age children and supports parenting because the experts tell us that the early years are the most formative in a child's development. It engages communities through peace marches, peace concerts, and supports initiatives such as Peace for Champs and the 10,000 Men and Their Families March. Mr. Speaker, in conclusion, we welcome the call for a bipartisan approach to crime from the Prime Minister, and the opposition will answer the call in the national interest. However, there is no magic overnight solution, so let's continue what works. Let's ensure that we work on the increased professionalization of the JCF. Let's ensure that we continue to have no political interference in the operations of the JCF. And Mr. Speaker, I should just warn the Minister that the apparent politicization of the board of the National Police College isn't going down well in the public. We must continue greater use of technology and intelligence. Your predecessor, then spokesman on national security, always said we need more resources allocated to the security forces for crime control measures, and I agree with him. We need more school and community-based initiatives aimed at addressing the root causes of crime and violence. And finally, Mr. Speaker, if the government is serious about a bipartisan approach, then let us continue the Unite for Change initiative and show that both sides of this House unite for change. Thank you.